Dore Gold, thanks for joining me on UpFront. In the last couple of weeks, the United States government, the Trump administration, has cut funding to the UN Refugee Agency, which looks after Palestinian refugees, has cut funding to Palestinian cancer patients, has shut down the Washington, D.C. mission of the PLO, the representative body of the Palestinian people. You must be delighted.
Well, we don't get delighted in the problems of the Palestinians. You know, for us, it would be better that these issues not happen and that we could just sit and negotiate and reach an agreement. A lot of this is self-inflicted punishment on the part of the Palestinians. They knew that if they start playing around with the International Criminal Court, there is American legislation that was adopted in 2015 which says that will have implications for their offices in Washington. That wasn't a Donald Trump invention. That was done back then.
You say you want to solve the conflict. Your former ambassador to Washington, D.C., Israeli politician Michael Oren, says, quote, the Americans are punishing the Palestinians in order to make them return to the table. What table is that, by the way? Because there doesn't seem to be anything to return to. What are you willing to actually offer the Palestinians? An actual state?
Well, we're not going to start negotiating on television, and Michael Oren has his interpretation, and it's legitimate. Mine is a little bit different. I have ideas, and I've sat with Palestinians for years talking about alternative models for solving this problem. Let us get to a table, and let us put those ideas out, and let's try and resolve this once and for all. In one very important sense, what President Trump is doing, he's trying to introduce realism. Don't start believing that you're going to get 5 million refugees to return to Israel. It's not going to happen. And if you start believing that propaganda, you'll never negotiate a solution.
Which people are going to accept being treated like this year after year, decade after decade, as the Palestinians have? You're only going to make them much more nationalistic than they already were by treating them in this fashion.
In my view, the important way to move forward is to address the issue of dignity. The dignity of the Palestinians is more important than the amount of land we're talking about. So frankly, that's my point of departure. It's different than people who just say it's a matter of percentages of territory.
Well, it's easy to say that percentages of territory don't matter when you control 100% of the territory. But just to be clear, because I know most members of the Israeli cabinet don't support a two-state solution, the Prime Minister himself, your former boss, your friend Netanyahu, has said he is only offering a quote-unquote state minus to the Palestinians. So what is your position, Dore Gold? Do you support a two-state solution? And this isn't about negotiating on TV. Do you support, in principle, a two-state solution as the end goal to this process, quote unquote? Yes or no?
I would rather not answer that. But I will say that Palestinian self-government does not frighten me. I don't want to just put things into slogans. We have to sit down and work this out. Right now, we now have new regional players who can have a very constructive role. I'm talking about the Arab states. There's the whole question of developing facilities for Gaza. It mostly can be in Palestinian sovereign territory in the Gaza Strip.
And Gaza, of course, is occupied according to the UN, not sovereign.
You can't just fit this into...
No, it's a very simple question. Most people in the world, in most governments of the world, including in former Israeli governments, said they support a two-state solution or they don't support a two-state solution. It's a very simple question. Do you support a two-state solution? I'm going to take your silence as no, you don't.
No, I have no problem with a Palestinian state as long as we have defensible borders for Israel and an arrangement that protects religious pluralism in the whole area. I don't want to go into further detail than that, but I think that we have to retain our vital defense needs, and that is not a simple solution. The international community shouldn't judge us. It shouldn't build up Palestinian expectations that Israel is going to do a striptease and get rid of all the territory it captured in a war of self-defense in '67. It has to come up with realism.
I think the international community would say that giving up occupied territories is not a striptease.
Realism is the name of the game.
It's sticking with international law. But just on the peace plan itself, you can't seriously believe that the three people Donald Trump has put in charge of coming up with a peace plan, his son-in-law Jared Kushner, his former real estate and bankruptcy lawyers David Friedman and Jason Greenblatt, none of whom have any experience in diplomacy or peacemaking, all of whom are hardcore supporters of illegal settlements. Two of them have even given money to settlements. That's the trio that's going to bring peace to the Middle East? Seriously?
You know, Jimmy Carter had a Secretary of State whose name was Cyrus Vance. and he came from the world of Wall Street law firms. So, everybody comes from somewhere. The question is whether they have a capacity to listen, to come up with creative answers, and to keep everybody on board. Right now, everybody who claims that he's knowledgeable about the Middle East has utterly failed. There has not been a successful American peace initiative, really, I would say, since Camp David with Egypt.
It's not just about their complete lack of knowledge and qualifications, also their blatant bias. As plenty of people, even in Washington, D.C., have pointed out, the US at least pretended to be an honest broker. It's never been an honest broker, but at least pretended. Now it doesn't even bother. Would you be okay if the US government sent 3 Arab Americans or conservative Muslim Americans who donated money to Palestinian groups to be their main negotiators on this conflict? You'd lose your minds in Israel if that happened.
I look at the behavior of an individual. I don't look at what card he's
Yeah, the behavior is that they gave money to illegal settlements. How can they be negotiators between Palestine and the Israeli government? Would you accept negotiators like that if you were a Palestinian?
Well, I'd have to hear him and hear him out. I speak with Palestinians. I have negotiated with Palestinians. In 1996, I sat with Abu Mazen for hours in Martin Indych's house in Herzliya. And, we can work solutions, not solve everything, but if we show each other respect and if we're serious, we can move forward.
Dore Gold, I want to talk about Prime Minister Netanyahu himself. You've been a close ally of his for many years now. Some would say that Netanyahu quite likes strongmen and dictators and authoritarian leaders, even of the anti-Semitic variety. He recently cozied up to Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who's praised Hungary's pro-Nazi World War II government, who traffics in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. He just hosted Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte, who's happily compared himself to Hitler. Is this really the company now that the Israeli Prime Minister keeps?
We are trying to broaden our international connections all around the world, in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, and the Prime Minister has led an amazing effort to do that. There's a big difference between Viktor Orban and the anti-Semitic party that runs in the parliament. You can't give everybody the same broad brush.
He praised the Hungarian leader who worked with the Nazis, Miklos Horthy. Are you okay with that now?
No, I don't like that. But you know what? Around the world, you have all kinds of governments which have all kinds of understandings of history that you don't agree with.
Okay.
You have to express your view. It's important to stand up in Hungary and talk about the lessons of the Holocaust. But you don't have to agree with everything that Viktor Orban has said.
Some would say that it's not a surprise, this stance of Netanyahu is given. He himself made racist comments about Arab voters coming out to vote in droves during the last election, and Israel is becoming a more and more racist place, some would say. The nation-state law, for example, controversially passed over the summer, says, quote, the right to exercise national self-determination in Israel is unique to the Jewish people only. It makes Hebrew the country's official language, downgrades the status of Arabic, and establishes Jewish settlement as a national value without mentioning a single word about equality or minority rights.
Well, I suggest you read the Balfour Declaration, which envisioned a Jewish homeland. It didn't talk about an Arab homeland. Did that mean that Lord Balfour and the British government were racist, prejudicial, or they were trying to help out a people who had been downtrodden, who had lost their ancient homeland, but were determined to recover it?
Many would argue Lord Balfour was anti-Semitic in his past, but the point is that many Israeli politicians voted against this law because they don't see it as in line with Jewish history or even with Israeli history. This is a new and very right-wing move. Plenty of Israeli politicians voted against it. Israeli Palestinian legislators called it apartheid, members of your own parliament. Even the bipartisan head of the Israeli Democracy Institute condemned it as an unnecessary embarrassment to Israel. It's jingoistic and divisive.
Well, as Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I led Israeli delegations to South Africa. I sat with the Foreign Minister of South Africa, and no one calls us an apartheid state because they understand the real suffering under apartheid, and they don't want to, brand us with that accusation. And they know that in apartheid South Africa, there were hospitals for blacks and hospitals for whites. You go to the emergency room at Hadassah Hospital and you will see Jewish doctors taking care of Arab patients and the other way around. We are not an apartheid state. We are a state with equality for all people.
That's completely false what you just said. Plenty of senior ANC politicians, South African anti-apartheid campaigners have called Israel an apartheid state. Desmond Tutu has talked about seeing apartheid on the ground when he visited Israel and the occupied territories. But put that to one side, whether it's apartheid or not, what would you call a country in which one group of people have an exclusive right to self-determination based on race and religion and 20% of the population doesn't? What do you call that country if not apartheid? Because that's what your nation-state law is enshrined.
Our nation-state law has nothing new in it. It has to do with constitutional problems we have in Israel about...
The president of Israel intervened in the debate. Come on, Dore Gold. You're misleading the audience. You know it was a hugely controversial law. The president of your country intervened to condemn an earlier version of it. Please do not say this is just some uncontroversial continuation of the Balfour Declaration. Don't insult our intelligence.
No, it is an internal debate. It is a legitimate internal debate that has to do with the powers of the Supreme Court and its effect.
No, that's not true. It specifically says that only the Jewish people in Israel have a right to self-determination. Where does that leave the 20% of the population who are Palestinian?
I think that the law is there to make clear that Israel is the national homeland of the Jewish people. And that's why it was set up.
I asked a very specific question, Dore Gold. Do Palestinians in Israel have a right to self-determination? Or are they second-class citizens behind the Jews who have an exclusive, a unique right, is what the law says, to self-determination? A unique right for one group of people.
The state of Israel was set up originally because the Jews had been so discriminated against and so oppressed in countries leading up to the Holocaust that there had to be one homeland, one place where they could claim a right of self-determination. That's all that law was referring to.
So do you deny Palestinian self-determination inside of Israel? Palestinian citizens of Israel have no right to self-determination. You agree with the law on that?
Yeah, I would say I would deny the rights of Canadians to have self-determination inside the United States. I would deny the rights of Mexicans to have a right of self-determination inside the United States.
So you're now telling us on this TV show that 1/5 of the population of Israel are foreigners. They're equivalent to Canadians living in the United States. That's quite an admission. I've interviewed Israelis for years, and I've always been told by Israeli spokesmen, everyone's equal in Israel. You're now saying, no, Palestinians are the equivalent of Canadians in America. That's an astonishing statement.
Well, I am saying that we have a state for the Jewish people that has been established. We have to resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and there will be a Palestinian national entity where their national self-expression can be fully expressed.
So just to be clear, Dore Gold, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Just to be very clear, are you saying that the 1/5 of the Israeli population who are Palestinians, who you told me a moment ago are equally treated in Israeli hospitals, that they should leave to go to a Palestinian state now under this law?
I didn't say that. I didn't say they have to leave. This is going to be a state. It is a state for the Jewish people that will give equality to others who live here, whether they are Palestinian,
That's not what the law
Arabs,
says.
whether they are Druze, or whatever their national and religious background.
Dore Gold, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you for joining me on UpFront.